The lonely girl by the window. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon in the city of Los Angeles. The sun poured down gently through the large windows of a small community center, nestled between tall apartment buildings and corner shops. The center was filled with laughter, music, and the sound of sneakers squeaking on the gym floor. A local charity had organized a fun day for children with special needs. There were games, food stalls, music, and even a magician performing tricks near the basketball court. Balloons floated near the ceiling, and colorful streamers danced in the air-conditioned breeze. But in the farthest corner of the room, near a large window overlooking the playground, sat a little girl in a wheelchair. Her name was Emily. She was just 9 years old. Her hair was tied back in two neat braids, and she wore a pink hoodie that looked slightly too big for her. Her legs, thin and still, rested gently on the metal footplates of her wheelchair. Emily had been paralyzed from the waist down since she was 4 years old after a terrible car accident that took her mother's life. Ever since that day, she had lived with her grandmother, who did her best to raise her with love despite their struggles. Emily sat alone, watching the other children run and play. They were jumping over cones, laughing in circles, playing tag, and throwing basketballs into the hoop. Every now and then a child would glance at her, then look away quickly, unsure of what to say or do. Some seemed kind, others just unsure, but no one came close. A volunteer with bright eyes and a ponytail approached her with a smile. "Hey, sweetheart, want to play some games?" Emily looked up at her, tried to smile, and then shook her head. "I'm fine," she whispered. The volunteer nodded, hesitated, and then walked away to help with the face painting station. Emily turned her gaze back to the window. She didn't cry. She was used to this. At school, during birthdays, even on playgrounds. It was always the same. She was the girl no one picked. Not out of cruelty, but because people just didn't know how to include her. And so she remained a silent observer of life happening around her. Outside, a sleek black motorcycle pulled up to the front of the community center. A man stepped off and removed his helmet. It was Keanu Reeves. Dressed in jeans, a worn leather jacket, and a calm, thoughtful expression, he didn't arrive with fanfare. He hadn't come for publicity or attention. Someone had quietly invited him. A charity worker who had helped organize the event, and who knew that Keanu cared deeply about kindness and inclusion. As he walked into the hall, a few adults recognized him and whispered to each other. But Keanu raised a finger to his lips with a playful grin, silently asking them not to make a fuss. He wanted to be there not as a star, but as a human being. A helper. He greeted the children, shook hands with volunteers, and crouched down to high-five, a boy building a Lego castle. But then, from across the room, his eyes caught Emily's. She was still by the window looking at everyone else, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. Keanu noticed the way her shoulders sank, the way her hands fiddled nervously with the edge of her hoodie. He noticed how no one else stood near her. He gently excused himself from a group of kids, then slowly walked toward Emily. She didn't react at first. Perhaps she didn't recognize him, or maybe she was just used to people walking past her. But he stopped, knelt down to her level, and said softly, "Hi there, I'm Keanu." She looked at him, startled. "Keanu Reeves?" she asked. He smiled, nodded. "Yeah. What's your name?" "Emily," she replied, almost in a whisper. "It's really nice to meet you, Emily," he said, offering a gentle handshake. She shook his hand lightly, unsure why he was talking to her. "You don't have to sit with me," she said, trying to sound casual. "No one really does." Keanu's expression softened. He tilted his head and said, "Well, then they're missing out, because I'm guessing you've got some amazing stories to tell." She looked away, embarrassed. "Not really. I just watch. I'm not good at stuff." Keanu leaned closer. "You know, watching is how actors learn. I watch people all the time. I learn from them. And you seem like someone with a big heart." "I don't get picked," she said after a long pause. "Not for games, not for teams, not even for silly stuff. I'm just here." Those words hit him deeply. He had seen so much in life, Pain, beauty, kindness, and cruelty, but nothing could prepare him for the quiet sadness in her voice. This wasn't a scripted moment in a movie. It was real. A child feeling left behind by the world. He took a breath and looked around the room. "You want to do something with me?" he asked. She blinked. "Like what?" "Anything. You get to pick. And this time, no one can say no." She looked confused. "Why would you want to play with me?" He shrugged. "Because I think the best people are often the ones no one notices at first, and I like to find treasure in unexpected places." Her lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but something close. "Okay," she said slowly, "but I don't know what to do." Keanu stood up and looked around. "How about we create something cool together? Maybe we build a story booth over there. I brought some supplies from my motorcycle bag. Notebooks, crayons, a camera. Maybe we let other kids come to us instead. And you be the boss." Emily's eyes widened. "Really? Really? But only if I get to be your assistant." For the first time that day she laughed. It was a soft laugh like the sound of wind chimes. Keanu smiled. He turned and called over a few volunteers. "Hey guys, can we make a story station? Emily's leading it." Soon, people began to notice. Children grew curious. Some wandered over. They saw Keanu Reeves helping a girl in a wheelchair set up a little creative space with markers, paper, and a small cardboard sign that read, "Story Corner." They didn't know what to expect, but somehow it just felt inviting. And for the first time in a long time, Emily wasn't just watching life. She was in the center of it. People were lining up to share stories, to listen to hers, and to laugh with her. And all it took was one person who saw her when no one else did. The girl who found her voice. The story corner began as a small idea, whispered between two strangers, one famous and one forgotten. But within an hour, it had become the heartbeat of the entire event. Emily, who once sat alone by the window, now had a line of children waiting to speak with her. Her wheelchair didn't make her invisible anymore. In fact, it became a symbol, not of limitation, but of quiet courage. She wore a paper crown someone made for her, and a volunteer had draped a glittery scarf over her shoulders, calling her the storyteller queen. Keanu stood behind her like a loyal assistant, his jacket tied around his waist, crouching to listen as kids shared their tales. Sometimes he added sound effects. Sometimes he acted out scenes. But mostly, he let Emily shine. He never took the spotlight. He passed it gently to her like handing over a torch in the dark. "Next," she called out, giggling. A boy stepped forward. He was shy, barely older than her, with freckles across his nose and a toy robot in his hand. "What's your story?" Emily asked. The boy hesitated. "I don't really have one." "Everyone has one," she said gently. "Even if it's small." The boy smiled and told a story about his robot saving a lost kitten in space. Emily listened with wide eyes, asking questions, clapping at the end. Keanu added a booming robot voice, making everyone laugh. The boy beamed, and as he left, he whispered, "Thank you," to Emily. And meant it. Hours passed like minutes. Parents watched from the sidelines, amazed. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Volunteers whispered to each other, "She's incredible." Reporters who had quietly shown up after hearing about Keanu's visit began snapping photos, not of him, but of the girl who had become the soul of the day. But none of that mattered to Emily. All she saw were faces, eyes, smiles, people coming to her, not out of pity, but respect. And something inside her began to shift. For so long, she had believed the lie that she was invisible, unworthy, forgotten. Now she saw the truth reflected in the kindness of strangers, and in Keanu's unwavering presence beside her. When the event drew to a close, the center's organizer came forward with a microphone. Her voice echoed through the hall. "Before we end, we have one more announcement," she said. "Today, something magical happened, and it started with a brave little girl named Emily." The crowd turned to look at her. Emily blushed. Keanu gave her a soft nudge, whispering, Stand tall, Your Majesty, the organizer continued. We've decided to make this story corner a permanent part of every event we hold. And Emily will always have a seat at the table, because she reminded us that everyone, no matter their ability, deserves to be seen, heard, and celebrated. A round of applause thundered through the hall. Emily's hands trembled. She looked up at Keanu. Why me? She asked. Why did you come to me? Did you? He knelt beside her, looking serious. Because I've been that person, the one sitting alone, thinking no one notices. I know what that feels like. And I promised myself, if I ever had a chance to make someone feel seen, I'd take it. Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. Thank you, she whispered. Keanu placed a hand on her shoulder. No, thank you. You reminded all of us what real strength looks like. Later, as the sun dipped behind the buildings, turning the sky a soft orange, Emily's grandmother arrived to take her home. She walked into the hall holding a coat and a reusable shopping bag, her face tired but kind. Her eyes widened when she saw the crowd around Emily. She blinked in disbelief as she saw her granddaughter laughing beside Keanu Reeves, surrounded by children. Emily, her voice cracked. Grandma, Emily called, her face lit up with joy. This is Keanu, and I'm the storyteller queen now. Her grandmother looked at Keanu, stunned. Are you really? He smiled gently. Yes, ma'am. And your granddaughter is incredible. Tears spilled down the woman's cheeks. She's been through so much, and today, I don't know what happened, but thank you. She did it herself, Keanu said. I just noticed. Emily's wheelchair rolled toward her grandmother, who knelt and hugged her tight. I'm so proud of you, she whispered. As they prepared to leave, Keanu walked them to the door. He handed Emily a small leather notebook. Keep writing, he said. Your voice matters, and I hope we meet again someday. Maybe on a movie set. You could be a writer, a director, whatever you dream. She looked at the notebook in awe. On the first page he had written, Dear Emily, the world is waiting for your stories. Don't let it wait too long. Your friend Keanu. She clutched it like treasure. Outside, night was beginning to fall. The streets were glowing with headlights and distant laughter. Keanu watched as Emily and her grandmother disappeared into the evening. Two figures against the soft shimmer of the city. He stood still for a while, breathing in the cool air. He had faced cameras, crowds, critics, and chaos, but nothing had moved him quite like that day. Not because he had done something heroic, but because he had witnessed the quiet transformation of a child who simply needed to be seen. He climbed back onto his motorcycle, pulled on his helmet, and took one last look at the community center. The Story Corner sign still hung on the wall, fluttering slightly from the breeze of the closing door. With a soft smile, Keanu whispered, You were the hero today, Emily. Then he turned the key. The engine roared to life and he disappeared into the night, leaving behind a girl who no longer felt invisible, and a story that was only just beginning. The echo beyond the hall the days that followed felt different. For Emily, there wasn't a sudden miracle. Her legs didn't start working and the kids at school didn't all become saints overnight. But something had shifted inside her. It was small, almost invisible to the world, like a seed pressed quietly into soil. But it was real. She had been seen, not for what she couldn't do, but for the voice she carried. And now, every morning when she rolled up to her classroom door, she held that leather notebook close to her chest like armor. She had started writing in it that very night. Words poured out of her, thoughts she'd held back for years. She wrote about the car accident, about how she missed her mom, about the pain of being stared at, ignored, or talked to like a baby, about the way the chair made her feel like she took up too much space and yet somehow never enough. And she wrote about Keanu, not as a movie star, but as the man who had knelt beside her without pity and handed her back her story. Her grandmother noticed the change too. Emily, who once came home in silence, now told her about classmates, teachers, even jokes she heard in the hallway. One evening, as Emily read aloud a story she had written about a magical girl with wheels made of starlight, her grandmother whispered, You sound like your mother when you talk like that. She used to make up stories about the moon. Emily smiled. I think she helps me write them. But outside their small apartment, something else was growing. Photos from the community center had begun circulating on social media. People had posted snapshots of the story corner, of Emily's bright smile beneath her paper crown, and of Keanu Reeves crouched beside her like a knight serving his queen. No one had planned it. It wasn't a publicity stunt, and that's exactly why the world couldn't stop sharing it. In a matter of days, the images had been reposted millions of times. Hashtags began trending. Darn story, corner, the girl who inspired Keanu. Emily's voice. Journalists called the community center asking for more details. News anchors played clips of Keanu saying, "I just wanted to listen," while emotional viewers tweeted about crying at their desks. And somewhere between all the noise, one quiet truth rang louder than the rest. Kindness was still powerful. Keanu stayed silent. He didn't give interviews. He didn't post about it. But he did call the community center and ask, "How's Emily doing?" When they told him about the social media storm, he only said, "Make sure she's okay with it," because he knew fame could be a double-edged sword, warm one moment, cruel the next. Meanwhile at school, Emily's teachers began noticing her writing. Her English teacher, Mrs. Willis, asked if she could read one of Emily's short stories. Aloud to the class, it was called The Girl in the Shadow Suit. It was about a lonely superhero who didn't fly or shoot lasers. She just listened to others, and in doing so, helped them heal. When Mrs. Willis finished reading, the room was silent. Then a boy in the back raised his hand and said, "Can we make that into a comic?" Others nodded. Even the ones who had barely spoken to Emily before looked at her differently now, not with pity, but curiosity, admiration. And then came the letter. It arrived in a plain envelope addressed to her grandmother's apartment. Inside was an invitation, not from a talk show or a magazine, but from a national children's literature conference in San Francisco. They had read about Emily's story. One of the organizers had seen the photos online, tracked down her writings, and wanted her to speak at a youth panel on storytelling and inclusion. Her grandmother gasped. "San Francisco? Emily, that's a whole plane ride away." Emily's eyes sparkled. "They want me to speak, on stage?" "They do," her grandmother said, holding the letter close. "And they even want to cover our travel. Everything." Emily looked at her notebook, then back at her grandmother. "Can I say yes?" Her grandmother knelt beside her, voice trembling. "Baby, you can say yes to anything now." They didn't have fancy suitcases. They packed in old bags with zippers that stuck and wheels that wobbled. Emily wore her nicest hoodie and her grandmother borrowed a coat from the neighbor. But none of that mattered. As they boarded the flight hand in hand, Emily pressed her forehead to the window and whispered, "Thank you, to the stars." And, somewhere else in the world, Keanu Reeves was filming a scene for a movie. During a break, he took out his phone and checked his messages. A picture had just come through. Emily on a stage holding a microphone, her wheelchair beside a large banner that read, "The Voices That Change Us." He stared at the image for a long time, then turned his phone face down. He didn't need the world to know. He didn't need credit. What mattered was this. A girl once hidden had now stepped fully into the light. Back in San Francisco, Emily spoke to an audience of hundreds. Her voice trembled at first, but she read from her notebook, told the story of her day at the community center, of how one person had picked her, not out of obligation, but choice. She ended with a line that would go viral in hours. "I thought, I had nothing to give, but all along I had a voice, and sometimes that's more than enough." The crowd stood. Applause echoed through the hall, and though Keanu wasn't there in person, his presence rippled through every moment, the silent kindness that started an unstoppable wave. When the conference ended, Emily wheeled herself backstage and met a publisher who wanted to help her. "Release a children's book." Her grandmother cried. Emily simply smiled and said, "Okay, but only if I get to dedicate it to a man who listened." The ripple through the world. When Emily returned home from San Francisco, something felt unfamiliar. Not in the way cities differ or hotels echo with strange sounds, but in how her small apartment now seemed larger, as if her world had quietly expanded and taken the walls with it. The worn carpet, the creaky ceiling fan, the soft humming of her grandmother's kettle. Everything was the same, and yet nothing was. It was as if she had stepped into a story where the main character finally realized she had been the author all along. The publisher who had spoken with Emily backstage at the conference kept their promise. They didn't rush her. They didn't pressure her with contracts or deadlines. Instead, they sent her a blank notebook with embossed golden letters that said, "Your world, your words." The gesture made Emily cry. She clutched it to her chest and whispered, "This time I get to choose the ending." Day after day, she wrote. Not always about herself, but about the world as she saw it. Magical, broken, brave. She wrote about children who turned pain into paint, grandmothers who stitched hope into bread, and shadows that whispered encouragement instead of fear. And each night, before sleep, she'd read one story aloud to her grandmother, who sat in the rocking chair with a soft smile and tear-filled eyes. Meanwhile, the internet did not forget. A video clip from the San Francisco panel, where Emily had said, "I thought I had nothing to give, but all along I had a voice," went viral again. This time it was picked up by a global campaign about youth empowerment and disability awareness. Teachers began playing it in classrooms. Schools asked their students to write essays about what it meant to be seen. And without meaning to, Emily had become more than a girl in a wheelchair. She had become a voice that cut through noise, soft but unshakable. Keanu watched from afar. He didn't reach out. Not yet. He believed in letting stories breathe, in giving people the space to grow without being overshadowed. But he followed her journey quietly, reading every article, watching each clip, smiling whenever someone referred to Emily as the storyteller queen. And still, his own name stayed hidden behind the curtain just as he liked it. One rainy morning as Emily wheeled into school, her principal greeted her at the front door with a strange look on his face, a mix of pride, confusion, and awe. "Emily," he said, "there's something I need to show you." He led her down the hallway, past the classrooms and the art room and the old gym where the lights always flickered. They stopped at the library. Taped to the door was a flyer with her name at the top. Beneath it were these words, "Emily Grant, National Youth Speaker. Upcoming TED Talk. How kindness found me when I felt invisible." Her breath caught in her chest. I didn't know." "Your story matters," the principal said gently. "And now the world's asking you to share it." She didn't speak for a moment. Her fingers traced the edges of the flyer. Part of her was terrified, of crowds, of cameras, of the weight that came with words. But another part, deeper and quieter, whispered, "You were never just a girl in a chair. You've always been more." Now they see it too. The days leading up to the TED Talk blurred into one another. She practiced in front of her mirror, then in front of her teacher, then her classmates. Every time she grew a little stronger, her voice steadier, her message clearer. She wrote the talk herself, no ghostwriter, no Polish. Just truth. On the day of the talk, she wore a simple blue dress and her grandmother's pendant, a silver heart that used to belong to her mother. The theater was packed. Lights shone hot and blinding, but Emily kept her focus on the red dot, on the stage floor. Her hands trembled, but her heart beat with purpose. "Hello," she began, her voice echoing gently. "My name is Emily, and for a long time I thought I was the background character in other people's stories." She paused. The room held its breath. "When you're in a wheelchair," she continued, "people see you, but they don't really see you. They talk over you, around you. They don't pick you for games or dances or group projects. And slowly, you start to believe you have nothing worth giving. You stop raising your hand, you stop speaking." Her voice grew stronger. "But then one day someone sat beside me and didn't look away. He didn't talk to me like I was broken. He listened. He said, 'I think the best people are the ones no one notices at first.' And for the first time, I felt like I had been picked not because someone had to, but because someone wanted to." Tears welled in the audience. "So now," she said, "I speak for every kid who's ever whispered, 'No one picks me.' I speak for the quiet ones, the different ones, the ones who don't fit into boxes. I'm here to say, we are not invisible. We are not less. We are not broken. We are just waiting to be seen." The applause that followed shook the room. Emily bowed her head, closed her notebook, and wheeled herself off stage. Behind the curtain, she covered her face and cried, not from fear but from release. It felt like a dam breaking. Years of silence finally finding air. What she didn't know was that someone was watching from the last row of the theater, wearing a hoodie and sunglasses, hands clasped together. Keanu had flown in quietly, no cameras, no press. He sat in the shadows, heart full, and as the applause washed over the room, he whispered to himself, "That's the voice I always believed in." After the crowd thinned and the lights dimmed, Emily was brought backstage. A coordinator handed her a gift box with a note inside. It read, "Dear Emily, I watched you light up the world tonight. I'll always be your assistant. Your friend, Keanu." Inside the box was a small silver pin shaped like a paper crown, just like the one she wore at the story corner. Emily touched the pin, her fingers shaking. She looked around the backstage hallway, heart pounding. "He was here?" she asked. The coordinator smiled. "He didn't want to interrupt, he just wanted you to have this." Emily closed her eyes, holding the note close. He had come, not to be seen, not to steal attention, but to witness, to listen, just like he always did. And once again he had disappeared before the world could thank him. But Emily didn't need to see him, because the seed he planted that day in a small community center had bloomed into something vast, a forest of stories, a movement of hope, and a girl who no longer waited to be picked, because she had picked herself. The weight of being seen fame is a strange visitor. It doesn't knock gently or announce itself politely. It arrives uninvited, with flashing lights, ringing phones, and too many voices talking all at once. For Emily, it had first come like a breeze, soft and surprising, but now it pressed against her life like a storm. Her story had circled the globe. Children's hospitals requested video calls. Schools asked her to speak. Journalists called her grandmother day and night. One company even asked if she wanted to make her own animated series. It was everything she had once dreamed of and more, but it was also exhausting. Emily, barely 10 years old, began to feel the cracks beneath the glitter. The stories she once wrote freely now felt like assignments. People expected inspiration in every sentence, but some days she just wanted to be a kid. She wanted to stay in bed past noon, eat cereal while watching cartoons, or draw a silly stick. Figures in her notebook without someone asking, "What does this symbolize?" Her grandmother noticed it first. The way Emily's laughter grew thinner, the way her eyes sometimes wandered while speaking, as if part of her was drifting away. "You don't have to do all of this, baby," she said one night as they sat on the balcony overlooking the streetlight outside. "You're allowed to say no." Emily didn't answer right away. She looked up at the stars, her voice quiet. "But what if saying no means letting people down? What if I stop and they stop caring? People care because of who you are," her grandmother said gently, "not because of what you give them. And if they forget that, then they never really saw you at all." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. Instead, she reached into her drawer and pulled out the small silver pin shaped like a crown. She held it tightly in her palm as if grounding herself. That night she didn't write. She didn't post. She didn't speak to anyone but her grandmother. She just sat, still and silent, trying to remember the girl who once watched the world from behind a window, dreaming not of fame, but of being picked. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Keanu Reeves sat alone in his apartment, flipping through a leather-bound notebook of his own. Pages were filled with sketches, thoughts, letters never sent. And on the last page, tucked beneath a photograph of the community center's story corner, was a single scribbled line. "What happens to the quiet hero when the world gets too loud?" Keanu had been there. He had lived it, The applause that turns into expectation, the kindness that becomes currency. He had once been the lost boy sitting in the shadows of red carpets, wondering if anyone really saw the man behind the smile. That's why he saw Emily so clearly. Because in many ways she was him, the child version of himself he had never learned to protect. He made a decision that night. One not for the headlines, but for her. The next morning, Emily received a plain package in the mail. There was no return address, just her name written in neat black ink. Inside, she found a small hardcover book. The cover was plain, deep navy blue, and the title simply read, "Quiet Doesn't Mean Gone." Her fingers flipped through the pages. Each one contained short messages, handwritten, simple, and powerful. They weren't quotes or poems. They were reminders. It's okay to pause. The world will wait. Even sunflowers bow their heads sometimes. Your story is not a performance. It's a gift. On the last page, there was a message. Dear Emily, you don't owe the world anything except your truth. Rest. Laugh. Be silly. Create only when it brings you joy. I'm still your assistant, Keanu. Tears fell freely down her cheeks. Her grandmother came over and held her, rocking gently. That evening, Emily made a choice. She declined 3 upcoming interviews. She postponed a speaking tour. She wrote a blog post instead titled, "I'm Still Learning How to Breathe." It wasn't dramatic, just honest. She wrote about pressure, fear, and the quiet need to feel human again. And something surprising happened. People listened, they wrote back, and hundreds of them. Children, parents, artists, strangers, they said, "Me too." They said, "Thank you." They said, "I didn't know how to say it until you did." And suddenly Emily realized that even in stepping back, she was still guiding others forward. That same weekend, a new invitation arrived. Not from a stage, not from a brand, but from the same community center where it all began. A simple handwritten note read, "Emily, we're holding another kindness event next month. The Story Corner misses you. Would love to see you again. No microphones, no cameras, just stories and snacks. With love, Miss Claire, your old volunteer friend." Emily looked up from the note and smiled. "Grandma," she said, "can we go home?" "Baby," her grandmother whispered. "We never left." So a few weeks later they returned. The same building, the same hall. Balloons again swayed from strings. Music played from old speakers. And in the corner, beside a makeshift booth, with markers and paper, Emily rolled back into her chair. Not to be the main attraction, but to be Emily. No crown, no stage, just her. And beside her, seated quietly with a mug of tea, was Keanu. He had arrived earlier, helped set up tables, and now sat cross-legged, laughing as a child explained a story about a dragon made of jelly beans. When he saw Emily, he stood. "Welcome back, boss," he said with a warm grin. She wheeled up beside him, eyes gleaming. "I miss this." "Me too," he said. They sat side by side, 2 souls who had once been invisible, now surrounded by the sound of voices, laughter, and shared stories. Not as heroes, not as icons, but as people. And in that moment, the world outside, with its noise and screens and flashing lights, faded away. All that remained was the story corner, and the 2 people who reminded it how to breathe. The story that chose the world years past, not in the way the calendar measures them, but in the way people grow through moments. Emily didn't become a celebrity. She became something far more meaningful, a voice people turned to when they felt unseen. She didn't fill stadiums or trend every month. Instead, she filled hearts with quiet courage. Her name slowly moved, from headlines to hearts, from screens to conversations whispered between friends, teachers, children, and parents. She became a symbol not of survival, but of presence, of what happens when someone is simply seen. By the time Emily turned 14, the world had changed. Not because of her alone, but because of what she helped uncover. A space where kindness wasn't loud, but deep. A space where people remembered how to sit beside each other and just listen. Schools had started hosting story corners, modeled after the one she and Keanu had built years earlier. Libraries printed her quotes on bookmarks. Therapists read her stories to kids learning to express their own pain. But Emily didn't chase any of it. She just kept writing. Not for fame, not for applause, but because the stories kept whispering to her at night, and she had learned not to ignore them. Keanu remained in her life, not as a mentor towering above, but as a quiet constant, the kind of friend who sends a text at the right time or shows up unannounced with 2 mugs of hot chocolate and a notebook filled with doodles. They never made it about who he was in the world's eyes. He was just Keanu, her assistant, her fellow dreamer. The man who once chose to kneel beside a forgotten girl and ended up helping her stand in the world. One autumn morning, as yellow leaves danced through the air, Emily received a letter, not an email or a text, but a real letter, handwritten and folded neatly inside an envelope that smelled faintly of cedar and dust. It came from a girl named Lila who lived in a small town Emily had never heard of. The letter read, "Dear Emily, I'm 12 years old. I have a scar on my face that makes people stare. I don't talk a lot because I'm afraid my voice sounds weird. At lunch, I sit alone. But last week, our teacher read one of your stories, the one about the girl with wheels made of starlight, and something changed. I asked my mom if I could write to you. I want to tell you that your story made me feel brave." I brought my journal to school the next day and asked my class if I could read a poem. I was shaking the whole time. But afterward, 2 girls said they wanted to sit with me. I think your story picked me. Love? Little Emily didn't cry. She sat very still for a long time, holding the letter in her lap. The words weren't just kind. They were sacred. They proved something she had always hoped was true, that stories could travel further than people ever could. They could enter rooms we'd never see, touch hearts we'd never meet, and plant courage in the soil of someone else's silence. She wrote back to Lila, not as a star, not as a speaker, but as Emily, the girl who once waited by a window. Her letter said, "Dear Lila, thank you for letting my story find you. It's yours now. Tell it again. Tell it in your way. And remember, the bravest stories are the ones we live. Love, Emily." That winter, Emily's first full-length book, The Girl Who Chose Herself, and was published. It was a mix of stories, drawings, journal entries, and letters like Lila's. It didn't launch with red carpets or flashing cameras. It arrived quietly on shelves across the world, just as it was meant to. It sold not because of marketing, but because children passed it to their friends, teachers placed it on desks, and parents read it aloud before bedtime. And when Emily received the first printed copy in the mail, she opened the cover and ran her fingers over the dedication. For the ones who sit quietly in the corner, waiting to be picked. You don't have to wait anymore. A few weeks after the book's release, the community center hosted a reunion. It had been years since the original story corner, but they had preserved the space. They even painted a mural on the wall, a watercolor of a girl in a wheelchair holding a notebook with a trail of stars behind her. Beneath it were words from Emily's first talk. "We are not broken. We are just waiting to be seen." Keanu was there, standing beside Emily as she unveiled the mural. He looked at her, not as someone he had helped, but as someone who had helped him. "You changed the world," he said softly. Emily smiled, her eyes never leaving the mural. "We just reminded it how to care." He chuckled. "So what now, boss?" She turned to him, notebook in hand. "We keep listening. We keep choosing the quiet ones, because they're always telling the best stories. We just have to stop long enough to hear them." And with that, they sat, in the corner, of a room full of laughter and crayons and dreams, just as they had years ago. Not as teacher and student, not as star and admirer, but as 2 souls who once chose each other in a world that didn't know how to look. And somewhere, beyond that room, a girl named Lila finished her first poem. A boy in a hospital bed picked up a pencil and wrote his first line. A child with stuttering words raised their hand for the first time, and a new story began. Because sometimes all it takes is one person to say, "I pick you." And when that happens, the world listens.